percentage of equity that LabDAO would have versus a university institution. There's actually a database online that basically states the different universities' equity that they take. So, for instance, MIT might take 100%. Imperial College London might take 50%. And in this database,
Wow.
I think
100% of the entire flow goes to these universities.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Clique Podcast. Today we have a very interesting project here with us. This project has been something of a personal interest to me, as have been looking into the project for some time now. And I think, in my opinion, it's trying to solve a very critical problem in DeSci. And to kind of discuss this problem, we have the core contributor from this project, Eleanor Davies. Hi, Eleanor. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well, thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you. How are you doing?
Doing very well. Thank you for joining us today. I would like to, start this on a bit of a lighter note. Can you give the listeners an understanding about yourself and about the project, and then we can take it from there?
Yeah, sure. So, where should I start? So, LabDAO, what are we doing? So, we're building an online research institution for scientists. So, in short, we're building the tools that enable scientists to do their work completely online. And so, as for me, my background, so I kind of initially started out working at a consultancy that did advisory services for investment, large to mid cap, as well as sovereign wealth funds, on a political and regulatory level, in healthcare and the life sciences. So this kind of gave me like a real sort of primer as to how investment works, specifically for research and development, also on the really like kind of larger scale. And I just saw the fact that the way in which the system is funded is completely broken. And that's also when I sort of fell down the DeSci rabbit hole as well. A good friend of mine sent me an article by Sarah Hamburg, A16Z. Would recommend that to anybody who is looking to get a launch pad into DeSci. And so that's when I came across LabDAO and a couple of other DAOs as well. LabDAO interested me in particular. So I was there for a fly on the wall for a couple of months. So following the consultancy, I was working at ODX, so that's On Deck's investment fund, in fund operations, and was basically raising, deploying capital, doing all the due diligence for the startup accelerator companies, and then doing the portfolio management. Sadly, it didn't last for too long. The startup bubble, as we all know, has not been doing so well. But it was a good segue for me to kind of follow my passion and interest in DeSci. Was introduced to Nicholas, who's the founder of LabDAO, and here we are.
So what exactly were the issues that you'd seen during a time handling all these investments that connected you with what Nicholas was doing at LabDAO?
So the issues with that, so basically you'd see all of this investment going into, for instance, like treatments for rare disease or genetic disease, or the likes of diabetes, what have you, but nothing was really, it all seemed to be very much on the financiers, the regulators, what's happening in terms of politics, and it wasn't really in terms of it was really far removed from the actual laboratory, the R&D side. And it just felt to me as though the power structures in which science research is done, and also the way in which human longevity is managed, is totally out of whack. And maybe it sounds incredibly idealistic, but I find that DeSci really kind of gives scientists the power again to manage their IP, rather than it being kind of sold to a university or a company or corporate, that they basically just have kind of more agency over it. So a couple of threads that are kind of going on really, but that's kind of why I feel this way about DeSci and what LabDAO is doing.
I find that pretty interesting, because what DeSci at its heart really enables is it breaks down the boundaries that regulations provided by each jurisdiction has kind of created. I mean, you take a look at the way science is kind of operating right now. You have this unhealthy reliance on IPs. You can understand that from probably a farmer's aspect that okay, maybe there's a lot of money being put into developing these sort of early stage treatments. So you need to have that sort of IP. But then when you have every startup possible trying to create that sort of patterns, what happens is that the ability for developing countries to kind of get access to these sort of treatments is hampered. I mean, you take a look at the way the entire talent flow kind of flows through because of this. I mean, when you take a look at the US itself, you had DARPA kind of funding most of the research that's kind of taken place over there, and because US has always had this sort of resources from the beginning, what's happened is that developing countries don't get that share. A lot you see brain drain that happens across these countries to the US because they have the resources, they have the IP, and in that aspect, there's so much of inequality that takes place there, and DeSci kind of brings together all these scientists from across the globe to be able to research on all these issues that you don't find legally, that maybe it may not be possible in a jurisdiction, maybe you don't have the resources, but now you're able to bring them all together, the capital, the talent towards all these things. And coming to LabDAO, what does LabDAO in specific kind of enable that other DeSci projects don't? What I mean, in short, what's the overview of LabDAO?
So LabDAO basically democratizes access for scientists to access tools. So specifically in dry lab and wet lab infrastructure. So on the compute side, we partnered with Protocol Labs, and what this basically does is through this application called Bacalao, it allows scientists to run the compute literally from a Chrome browser from anywhere in the world. You don't have to be in a university or have access to a computer cluster. There's I think up to over a petabyte of data, so it's quite similar to AWS, except you can access this for free from your browser, and you can basically, through LabTeams, form a team around a project. Of course, identity, proof of humanity is verified in the background. I think it's also something that's important to note. But you have full access to tinker on your research project without having to think about or too much about capital. And there's also, so we have access to now to Science Exchange and Chromatic, which CRO marketplace. So now scientists also have access to over 3,500 laboratories from their laptop. Although we don't touch the IP side, it's like all the tools that are required in order to, in the journey up to that side. So it's just kind of Web3 infrastructure, doing this on your laptop, instead of having to rely on a university or whatever academic credentials. And then it's just kind of democratizing, accelerating progress in the life sciences, really.
So the way I see it, you're kind of focusing on creating a network that connects any sort of researcher, be it a student to a proper scientist across the globe, to be able to access these laboratories, and you're focusing it purely on life sciences. Are there other verticals that you're looking at?
So life sciences is the place where we're kind of focusing at the moment. That's mainly because of Nicholas's background. So he's a computational biologist, ex-Harvard, Broden Institute, and a lot of projects that we're associated with in the DeSci ecosystem are more longevity biotech. However, that's not to say that this type of infrastructure is applicable to other types of scientific research. So, for instance, New Atlantis, working on metagenomics. I'm not sure if you come across them, but I would strongly recommend looking into what they're doing because it's really cool. So it's from a climate change point of view, but also marine biodiversity. We also partnered with Gainforest in the last Gitcoin grants round, and that was satellite imaging analytics for rainforest regeneration using the same type of infrastructure. Talent DAO was another one, Project Lion, that was measuring the language that's used on Discord servers in order to ensure community health. So that's also quite important for DAO governance. So really it has applications in a lot of different domains, but I guess you have to sort of start small and then kind of move adjacent.
The way I see it, you've kind of partnered with all these other DAOs to, I think in short, you're kind of incubating these projects also in a way, and that too with Talent DAO, with New Atlantis and Game Forest. I've noticed that, okay, these are all your partnerships with these projects, but how exactly are you enabling this network of laboratories, especially if you're not enabling the IP side of things? What exactly are you enabling? If I'm a student or a researcher, what exactly am I getting access to, and what does a workflow look like?
Sure, and that's a really good question because it kind of sort of like clarifies what LabDAO does and what the value proposition is important for any user when joining LabDAO. So first off, there's support in order to safely manage funds. So scientists, on average, spend 50% of their time applying for grants. We help scientists do that in the grant writing part and in the campaign strategy. This is more kind of Web3 directed. There was a campaign sort of strategy going on with Gitcoin, but there are also other grants out there like Methuselah Fund. So what we do is set up a multi-sig, help scientists set up the MetaMask, because actually to anybody outside of the Web3 ecosystem, it's pretty complicated and not everyone
needs to people who are in Web3 also find that tough.
So not only that, but there's the legal support aspect as well. So how do you spin up a DAO? How do you legally wrap this in order to safely manage the funds? Because that's another really important side. So if you decide, okay, maybe this is ready for venture funding, we'll be able to support with that too. And then there's also the part in which the IP, in like how the IP is managed after that. So there's like a legal advisory point there. So we're partnering with LabDAO on that point. There's also the access to the community. So being able to build hype, having PR from the LabDAO platform, graphics, being on the website, having like a subdomain on LabDAO. There's also the computational tools as well. So not only can scientists sort of gather around a project in the community and have that kind of platform, but have access to the tools as well, as I described earlier.
So you have the access to the community itself. Then the network that you access through the laboratories. If I'm right, it's the lab exchange protocol that you're talking about. How exactly? I mean, what is the sort of information that's being passed through here? I mean, if you're not focusing on getting out proper IP, are you kind of focusing on enabling research before the IP is created, and how exactly is that facilitated by the community? Because the way the DeSci world is right now, I mean, even though it's very nascent, but you have Web3 people who are kind of interested like the rest of us, but we don't know a clue about biotech. And you have to kind of bring in all these people who are kind of experts in their domains to come in and be a part of this community and enable that sort of exchange. How are you going to facilitate that within the broader marketplace is a question.
So actually it's something which we're building out right now. So it's also something that we're kind of working out as we're building the infrastructure. So Nicholas has the vision, and then so my side and the team side is like, how do we build and execute on this vision? What infrastructure is available to us, and how is this actually working in reality? So the exchange is something where, so the vision is for scientists who are working on projects to host something almost like a Fiverr or a type of marketplace where a scientist who's in the LabDAO ecosystem has their credentials also verified so that they're able to work on the project. So they're able to take that job for a bounty, be it USDC or Lab Token. Lab Token is yet to be launched, so more likely to be USDC. Do the job and then sort of rewarded for their contribution. So that's how the exchange protocol would work in theory. And we're kind of working on all the sort of Web3 MetaMask, Web3 auth, zero knowledge protocol type stuff in the background as well.
You mentioned that there's a issue of the educational on-ramp because, MetaMask is tough and all of that. But at the same time, DeSci has all these potential. What's been the broader feedback that you've gotten from scientists in, accessing all these communities because of the issues around Web3 and even the financialization of the token kind of creating that sort of chaos within Web3? What's been the broader stance from the scientists in general?
The main stance is that there's just almost like a sense of relief that somebody's actually doing something about the way in which science research is done, because I'm sure most scientists will agree it's broken, especially from the grant funding side. So even though, these tools are still being built and are in beta, and we have sort of users testing them at the moment, they're not quite ready to scale. There's just sort of like quite an excitement in the community, really, to kind of get started and using the tools, which I'm also really excited about, just to see this level of enthusiasm. So, I mean, in terms of the financial grant funding aspect, I'd say one point to bring in, which would be quite interesting, is dealing with the volatility in the crypto markets, and not only like having to do the whole MetaMask setup and all the just managing all that and doing the multi-sig and all that stuff, but also knowing how much a grant is going to be worth, depending on the type of cryptocurrency denomination is in. So I think another value proposition there for LabDAO is that once we have a good sort of user base for the tools, then to start sort of rolling out LabDAO focused grants in USDC, which is more sort of stable coin, and just sort of using that as like giving scientists a launch pad in order to do their research. So it depends on market conditions, really. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I mean, across verticals, I mean, be it DeFi or NFTs, it's that price volatility is something that you just can't escape. But then, if you want to enable that sort of network of a community that can thrive, can take active ownership of what's going on within LabDAO, you do need that token. Balancing those various interests out is going to be a massive challenge itself. I mean, DeSci in general, you take a look at VitaDAO, they have around $6 million worth of market cap for their token. I mean, if they're on top of Uniswap, the ability for broader Web3 participants besides key players like probably your Pfizer Ventures or whoever is a major entity that's willing to take part in the governance, there's just not an easier on ramp for the broader Web3 community to participate. And a lot of these things should be actively looked at to be able to enable that sort of democratization of what a certain DeSci community can offer, besides your entities, for the general Web3 audience, for participants who are from developing countries, making sure that sort of access is kind of critical that way. And what I wanted to understand was that you have community that you're looking to sort of attract. That is your life sciences community. You want to attract these people into the community. But then, how do you see people like us, the Web3 people who may not understand DeSci well, but we want to be able to contribute to DeSci? I mean, I don't recall the name of this particular person, Brett Cornick, I guess, Impact Finance. Essentially, he came out with an article saying why Web3 people are kind of necessary, because it gives us the ability to kind of participate in funding these sort of biotech or any sort of nascent science projects which were kind of withheld from us. It could be also participating in the governance and taking part in the rounds of these things, which were never really accessible to us because of these jurisdictions. What, in your opinions, are the benefits of Web3 people kind of participating with LabDAO? And also, because you've worked in biotech, also you understand the sector well, what are the limitations of having Web3 community participate in such a specialized vertical as biotech and life sciences?
To answer the first part of your question, then, I think it's important to have Web3 people in the DeSci ecosystem, just because you have an understanding as to how the infrastructure works, and that's probably the most important part of it. That's what makes DeSci, and also just sort of having the platform as well. So being able to, even use the network to spread the word about DeSci. It's like nobody's going to know what DeSci is unless people are talking about it. And something like science it's like a public good. It impacts everyone. So everyone hopefully has health insurance, or you go to the hospital, or you go and get a doctor appointment. So it's something which impacts everyone. I think that. So yeah, that's kind of like a really good sort of bridge. And I think as well, it's something which is pretty interesting and new also in terms of like from an investment standpoint. It's something which nobody's really come across before. So obviously Web3 people are the first people to come to it. And I think in terms of getting involved, less specific on the science side, but I mean, I'm also not a scientist and I'm in LabDAO. So there are plenty of roles that Web3 people can get involved in. So I mean, from community management to social media, PR, there's actually a lot of DeSci projects that are in need of good PR. So if you're great at that, then you already have a head start. There's the operations side, the finance side as well. So like clean financial management, not only of what's coming in and what's coming out, cash flow, but also grants. And in LabDAO's case, and VitaDAO, Molecule, BioXYZ, managing funds for projects that are live. So I think so anybody who has sort of like a financial background, you can easily take those skills into DeSci. And it's also such a nascent space anyway that
I may not be a biotech expert, but I can actually teach a scientist how to use a MetaMask. At least, okay, I have that much value add.
Yeah.
In that regard, probably we can all do a bit there, even though we'll need a lot of patience, but we'll all get there.
Yeah. And also, you have to note as well that everybody uses the healthcare system. That is science. And there are also, the likes of patient advocacy groups that are sort of starting to form their own DAOs. So Fleming Protocols is a really good example of this, where patients actually, use the funding in a DAO to find cures versus kind of going to big corporates and, not exactly scientists, but it's something that impacts everyone. Like it's a public good, or it should be a public good.
But I mean, what's interesting is that you've always had this sort of barriers that were restricted between the general public because you needed that sort of specialization, but now we're actively experimenting with what happens when you do get that sort of people involved across these frontiers. Maybe when it comes to the broad research itself, it may not be necessary to get actively involved with. Let's leave it to the experts to get that done. But the broader social layer, the aspect around the community, governance, finance, you do need people for that. And the DAO space has a lot of fantastic talent in that. And bridging that gap with scientists who may not have that sort of operational expertise or finance, it's a pretty good value add across the globe. You can have that sort of democratization of talent and capital coming together. All you need is to have a clarity of a pitch to just make that happen and just kind of set it through. And what LabDAO is doing with the sort of workflows you're enabling, I mean, creating that sort of marketplace for the broader life sciences data itself, creating the whole teams around it to be able to create that sort of research, and also having the fund which kind of incubates all these for teams are pretty cool to see. We just want to dive into the LabDAO project in general. I wanted to understand the Lab Exchange Protocol is your network that connects these labs and enables that sort of data transfer. How do you ensure that provenance and the integrity of that research is maintained across the data transfer network? I mean, because you see there's so much paranoia among players to protect their IP, to protect their research. And how do you ensure that level of integrity for an open network like this?
So, I mean, that's something that we're sort of working through at the moment. So what is the best and most frictionless way in order to ensure that? And I mean, the short answer is we are kind of exploring different options. We don't fully have one single solution yet. There are a lot of different sort of zero knowledge identity type of technologies that we're trialing. So Web3 Auth is another type of technology. I think you might want to double check this. But that's kind of one part in terms of ensuring proof of humanity. But as community members sign up to LabDAO, and also as we are sort of starting to scale things up a bit in terms of getting people around project, there is also, the compulsory question to provide the ORCID ID or the Google Scholar ID, just so that, you can really sort of KYC any scientists that are working on these projects. So in the actual Discord server itself, scientists, community members are free to do their work anonymously because, some scientists have academic affiliations and it's probably better to work under a pseudonym. But I guess, one part of ensuring that the work that's created on the exchange protocol is legit, really, or, is done by a reputable source is sort of through this type of mechanism. But again, don't have all the answers and just doing the most we can with the information that is available. And also, if anybody who's listening, or if you as well, know of any type of technology that's used outside of DeSci to kind of ensure this, then I would love to talk.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, DeSci itself is kind of nascent, and we've just had LabDAO itself. What they do is they kind of have knowledge request frameworks that are set up to kind of have any sort of request that's made by a patient or a medical provider. The flow of data across that network will be kind of developed by LabDAO, and even they don't have all the answers. So I think with time itself, and you involve the broader Web3 community, we can find the answers for that. What exactly is the end game for Lab Exchange Protocol, though? I mean, you take a look at how the broader research networks function within these jurisdictions. What exactly are the benefits that is the end game that you can see for scientists in general?
So, I mean, the exchange protocol is sort of one aspect of the tool set that we offer scientists. So initially, as we started out, we had the impression that the exchange protocol would be the thing, which is, the key product. But as we're sort of working out the whole, product market fit and the value proposition, the exchange protocol is sort of a part of that. So I'll go into that in a little bit of detail. So it basically enables scientists to work on projects from their laptop and without needing to have without kind of encountering the barriers by not having an affiliation with a university, for instance, and being able to work on these types of projects and competent scientists and being able to work for bounties. So it's kind of like a more project by project type of working. So I guess it's sort of it takes into account the future of work type of argument. So that's the exchange protocol. But the grand vision for LabDAO in general is just to hopefully change the way in which scientific research is done, with the goal of expediting scientific research and producing more cures for life-threatening diseases. I mean, if you look at Eroom's law, there's enough evidence there that states that we're sort of going through this great stagnation. So that really is the grand mission, really, just to enable scientists to do what they're good at, because the talent is there. It's just the way in which it's done, which is just so heavily bottlenecked. And B, is just to improve people's quality of life.
That itself is a pretty phenomenal ideal to work towards. I mean, you enable this sort of data flow across developing countries itself who may not have access. It's like, across life sciences in general, you take a look at COVID, that's kind of affected India. What enabled us to have speedy access to drugs was you were able to have generics of AstraZeneca and AstraZeneca and probably one more, the Russian vaccine. You were able to have generics made very quickly, and that was kind of manufactured for billions of people. But what if, something that's not mainstream, but then you have nascent tech, like, for example, hair DAO. It's not cancer, but, anything that's kind of affecting hair loss or something, treatments for that. You may not have readily available treatments over here, but with this sort of open access IP, you can kind of enable faster access to treatments that way. And that's pretty neat. I mean, I know that LabDAO doesn't involve in IP, but then we may see some broader communities that can enable that sort of deployment of IP soon in the future also. But then it brings to me one question. You have this sort of the flow of information that passes between the labs and the scientists. I mean, if there's a scientist sitting in India and the lab sitting all the way in London, how exactly are you kind of preventing any sort of fraud, or if there's any sort of dispute, is it primarily going to be between the scientist and the lab, or will you have any sort of processes set up to kind of ease things out?
So in terms of processes, this is sort of in the ideation phase, because the token isn't launched yet, and this is something which would be baked into the token smart contract, which is arbitration services. So any type of legal dispute that arises will be sort of dealt with, but the specifics and the technicalities are also yet to be sort of discovered, and I guess a lot of it as well will only kind of arise as it's being used. So this is important information that we need to take in as we build.
I remember reading your docs. You mentioned that you have escrow services that you would kind of have. You would have both the parties be involved in, and if you're a lab, you would have to kind of stake some lab tokens to be able to participate in this trade. And in the case of any sort of issues or any sort of malfeasance done by that particular lab, the token is kind of cut off. So there's an incentive for labs to stay true to the trade itself. So it kind of allows for that broad, easier integrity of trades across globes also, because they're putting in that token and you don't want to lose that. In that case, it's pretty neat. You're kind of developing the tokens for that also. But then stepping back, you mentioned that you have the broad lab teams also kind of working. Are they complementary to the lab exchange, or what exactly are the functionalities of lab teams in the DAO?
Yes, you kind of think of a lab team as a micro DAO. So imagine the LabDAO Discord, right? And then you got the channels on the side, and a lab team would be, say, small protein docking, or neuroscience, or knowledge graph, which is another great example of something that we're working on at the moment. So a lab team is a team of people who've come together, be it offline or via the Discord, and have basically been curated and will be launching a project or are potentially seeking services from LabDAO. So that's kind of how a lab team would work. It's more sort of within the community.
So essentially, the lab protocol, that network you're talking about, the labs are essentially these teams.
Exactly.
That's what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. So that means, so the laboratories that you mentioned earlier that are outside, that are in IRL, you would kind of on-ramp them into these teams, or are they separate entities?
So they're separate entities to start off with. So a lab is like in a LabDAO context is a web lab. So you get dry labs, you get wet labs, and now you have web labs. So thank you for also bringing that up as well, because lab team, there's a little bit of a confusion with nomenclature. So I think it's important to get that sort of ironed out, I think, in terms of consistency as we sort of like bring the project to market. In terms of onboarding laboratory services, so I guess this would be quite similar in terms of what we have with Science Exchange and Chromatic, in terms of scientists can rent laboratory space. For example, OpenCell was doing that, and that can sort of be a part of the LabDAO offering. But again, it is something that we're researching. It hasn't been built yet, but it's within the vision in terms of what we can offer for scientists. If that makes sense.
So the broad lab teams in general, they are teams that come in and they are kind of within that life sciences vertical. And I remember seeing your Airtable. I think you have around 15 teams, including the LabFund. So all these teams, these are like kind of like sub-DAOs, right? Essentially, they are kind of united towards the vision of LabDAO, but they are semi-autonomous teams that come in to kind of produce that sort of research and kind of play their role in the marketplace also.
how exactly has the broad go? I mean, the thing is, you have these sub-DAOs that kind of are participating in the network, and they should also kind of do their bit for the LabDAO vision. So sometimes what happens is that these sub-DAOs tend to have kind of go through with their own agenda at times. They may not really, if they don't have that sort of alignment with the broad DAO vision itself, you tend to see these sort of guilds splitting apart, especially when you have the token launch done and when things kind of get succeeded. How do you ensure that sort of alignment between the lab teams towards the broad LabDAO vision?
I think in terms of ensuring alignment, it needs to have a degree of similarity to Entrepreneur First, for instance, because the business models are quite similar in terms of Entrepreneur First being supporting a founder or two founders or a founding team in finding, what they are wanting to build. And LabDAO is quite similar in this regard in terms of supporting scientists, providing initial funding, and then being able to also act on the sell side, for instance, maybe for VitaDAO. So I think, as we sort of start to scale this and start to learn as well in terms of where things go wrong, where things go right, what we did right there, and where we could do better. Perhaps one element of this, as Web 2 as it sounds, would be simply signing a term sheet.
Okay. You have these term sheets that are signed across. That's a good way. The problem with DAOs in general is that they don't have these sort of contracts coming into place. So the ability for these sort of sub-DAOs in general to kind of walk away, there's no barrier. It's completely easy to walk away and create any sort of malfeasance, and kind of having these sort of agreements maybe made by smart contracts, probably having your token involved. I mean, if you want to start a sub-DAO, you probably need to kind of have some stake in the LabDAO, so that your incentive in the broader DAO vision is also there, and you cannot just go rogue too quickly. Plus, you can have that sort of agreement set in place where if you are looking to turn fully autonomous, then you need to have that sort of transition period where a team can come in, and all those clauses that just don't make it easy to walk away. Even though it's a DAO, it need not be a chaos. I think there should be some decent amount of rights and rules that should be set, and that shouldn't be stopped. That shouldn't stop you from calling it a DAO in general, just because you have basic contracts and rules.
In terms of, when you compare, for instance, the percentage of equity that LabDAO would have versus a university institution, there's actually a database online that basically states the different universities' equity that they take. So, for instance, MIT might take 100%. Imperial College London might take 50%. And in this database,
Wow.
I think probably had to link this in the notes because the name is just completely slipped out of my mind. But if you compare the equity that LabDAO would take versus the general universities, it's actually significantly lower. So I think that's another unique value proposition as well that would incentivize scientists to want to sort of stay within the ecosystem.
100% of the entire flow goes to these universities. Why do researchers stick with these people in the first place? Is it because of the reputation involved?
I guess it's having the credentials of being affiliated with a really good university. So, I mean, if you have Stanford on your roster, MIT, Harvard, Oxford, then it looks good. It's going to do something for you. But it's just, I guess it's just one of the flaws in terms of that kind of builds into the greater frustration as to why more scientists are looking towards DeSci as another way to do that research.
That itself kind of nailed the whole podcast. Wow. 100% of the equity just goes. And I mean, you just open up the network, you open up the ease of access to these things, and you just bring down the equity. I think you can see a lot of crazy amount of talent just pop in just by putting this one fact out there.
Yeah. So
wow.
I'm just posting the link in the chat. It's called spinout.fyi, and there's a database that was put together of which universities had like spinouts and the amount of the number of equity that was taken, what sort of field of therapeutics it's in. So that's also another part that kind of goes into the argument for DeSci.
Oh, that's pretty neat. And allowing for scientists to get a broad ownership of that research that's been done, while ensuring, a reasonable equity is also given to the DAO treasury in general for facilitating that sort of research. It's also pretty neat. And now that DAO treasury, whatever revenues that come in from the lab protocol exchange and whatever is being facilitated through the lab teams, it goes to the treasury. You mentioned that you have something called the LabFund. What exactly are you looking to incubate, and what exactly is the status quo that made you want to start this whole LabFund in the first place?
So the LabFund is kind of the last part of what LabDAO offers. So it's teams, tools, funds. So we've spoken about the first two. What the fund is the more sort of EF type of model where if a project is wanting to kind of take this a bit more seriously, and also receive the support that is offered by LabDAO, access to the community, legal incorporation, scientific tools, plus, grant support, funding, being able to access this as a whole sort of package. And so where the LabFund comes in is LabDAO giving the grant, Spark grant, to the project. What LabDAO does is give grants to micro DAOs, then obviously sort of take the equity component, however, is a lot lower there compared to other institutions, have research to back this up. So spinout.fyi is a good place to start. But of course, as I have been saying and will continue to drill down on this, it is also something that we're still figuring out. So that's kind of how it works in terms of investing, and then sort of having a more long-term outlook in terms of revenue generation. And then there's the sort of tokenomics treasury as well.
Closing remarks, Eleanor, what would you like to tell the listeners about LabDAO, like the roadmap? What's lies ahead for you guys? So the year has come to an end. What all have you kind of achieved? If you can sum that up. And what are you looking forward to in 2023? That'll be a good segue.
Yeah, for sure. So as we're wrapping up the year, we are going to hopefully get the minimum viable product of the exchange up and running and open source. So people in the community will be able to access it and also learn a bit more about what LabDAO's tools do and sort of see this in action. We'll also be able to provide the wet lab laboratory services via Science Exchange and Chromatic. So if you are interested in accessing these services, please do reach out. In terms of 2023, we are preparing for the token launch. So this will be quite an exciting event, but also a lot of preparation that goes into that beforehand. So building the product and then also becoming more decentralized as well as we go. I think the token launch in itself is probably the most exciting point to end this on, because it's progress, and it's what we like to see, especially in the DeSci ecosystem.
Can we see an airdrop for the Clique Podcast listeners anytime soon?
Stay tuned and keep following the LabDAO Twitter, and also join the community, because that's kind of where everything's happening, really.
Yeah, thank you, Eleanor. This was brilliant. So where can the listeners follow? Where can they see the good work of LabDAO? Would you like to? And what all other projects do you think in DeSci space that you think are super interesting and the listeners should kind of follow them?
Abhishek, most importantly, where do people follow Eleanor? I mean, you've been you've been a fantastic convo with you so far. We want to kind of see what else you've got to say. Where do people follow you also?
So you can follow me on Twitter. It's Gwei_Shah. So Gweisha. There's a double pun there because you have Gwei Shah and then Shah 256. You can follow LabDAO on Twitter as well. You'll probably find a lot more action on the LabDAO Twitter than mine. And labdao.xyz is where you can find out more and join the Discord. We are also undergoing a new rebranding, which will be launched at the end of this year as well. So stay tuned for that. In terms of other DeSci projects to get involved with, Knowledge Graph Guild is super interesting. So they're basically figuring out how to explore scientific questions and data Follow DAO because they're doing some really interesting stuff there. And they also did the IP NFT transfer not that long ago, which is super interesting. And New Atlantis as well, as I mentioned previously. It's a really interesting project to get involved with.
Absolutely. Can't wait to track all these projects. It's been an amazing convo, Eleanor. We would love to have you on for future episodes down the road. Listeners, thank you so much for following in for this one. Stay tuned for this and see you everyone.